So you need to very systematically track down emails or any other contact that your systems and your machines have had with this attacker. So you can draw like a perimeter around, look at this is the amount of damage that we are talking about. And so that's almost always a very necessary first step before you can plan on guarding your network against future attacks.
Welcome to another Hatchpad Insight. I'm Lauren Alexander, one of the creators of Hatchpad, the career hub connecting technologists with emerging startups. If it's your first time here, don't forget to hit subscribe for more insights like this one. Today, we're here with Jeet Dutta, the Director of Data Science at Adlumin, a startup headquartered in Washington, D.C. that's the leading security and compliance automation platform in the U.S. Jeet, thanks for hanging out with us at Hatchpad today.
Hi, Lauren. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeet, and as Lauren mentioned, I lead the data science team at Adlumin. I've been in this role for about a year now, and I came on board just when our startup was really ramping up our analytics, and we went through a pretty big expansion of our data science team. So all of that happened over the past year, just kind of when I came on board. And just a little bit personal background on myself. I started out in my career as a quantitative analyst and an econometric modeler. I built macroeconomic forecasting models for a leading economics consultancy. And then I bridged over to data science and led a data science team at a large bank where we were building business intelligence tool. We were developing them. And then being at Adlumin, it really is a pretty unique experience for me. Just the pace and energy of a startup are hard to match. And my current mandate here kind of reflects that. The idea is to quickly identify what our clients need and then develop accordingly. So to experiment with new data science and data handling techniques and technologies, and to solve IT security challenges and that just don't have widely available solutions at this time. And at Adlumin, the main product plus service that we offer is that it's a cloud native platform that can stream analytics. And the design is such that you can discover threats, malfunctions, and IT operations failures across any log data stream. So this means that if your organization has an IT asset that you need to monitor for security reasons, Adlumin can ingest all the security logs that are coming out from your networks and systems. And then we ingest this data into our own cloud. And then we can build all manner of analytics on that raw data. Analytics that can really empower your IT security folks with alerts and leads that something might be amiss. Anything that could go wrong, there are advanced warning systems that we could build, or just in your everyday daily monitoring activities, we could help you to quickly zoom in on areas that could be more problematic. And where my team comes in, what we contribute are machine learning algorithms that can automate a big portion of this threat detection process that I just described. And our platform, as well as our algorithms, are very flexible. We are continuously adapting them to fit the needs of existing clients, new clients. So we can pretty much cater or customize what we offer to a wide range of industries and clients.
So you mentioned machine learning, and that's certainly an interesting component in all of this. Could you explain a little bit more about what role that plays in the area of network security threat detection?
Right. So you could have like a really well-guarded network, but as we all know, attacks still happen, right? And really insidious attacks that can have far-reaching consequences in terms of data theft or just disruption of an organization's daily operations. Lately, the last couple of years, there have been some really major such attacks in the news as well. So at Adlumin, our thinking is that having security rules is not enough to safeguard an IT network, because a firewall, for example, is going to generate thousands of alerts a day, right? It's just not feasible for security professionals to chase down those many leads. So that's kind of where data science comes in. You need a data science layer to boost the signal to noise ratio. That will make the task a whole lot more manageable. So once an algorithm has kind of sifted through the data and identified some potentially malicious activity, you have a much more target rich environment for the security professionals to perform some follow-up analysis. It's a lot more manageable that way. And this role that data science plays in IT security is kind of similar to what data science does in other areas as well, to narrow down things that analysts that have more domain knowledge in specific areas can really focus their analytic prowess or their energies. And one other thing I'll mention in terms of the role that data science plays in IT security is that even if you did not catch the attack real time, even post breach, there's many lines of investigations you need to follow, because you need to kind of get a sense of how much damage did this attack do. So you need to very systematically track down emails or any other contact that your systems and your machines have had with this attacker. So you can draw like a perimeter around, look at this month, this is the amount of damage that we are talking about. And so that's almost always a very necessary first step before you can plan on guarding your network against future attacks.
Interesting. And so when it comes to applying machine learning for detecting IT security threats, what are some of those main challenges that you all encounter along the way?
Right. So these IT security threats are constantly evolving, and most types of threats don't necessarily have a signature pattern, so to speak. Like there's no set of actions or a sequence of events that you could say that, oh, right there, that's signaling a malicious attack. So your algorithm needs to be flexible in design and not so rules based. For example, you could have an individual user logging on to a machine that they've never accessed before, let's say. And you could say that that's a red flag for me. I'm going to write an algorithm to alert on these so-called novel logins. But the problem is that you could have other entities like network administrators who often log on to machines that they have not accessed before or normally don't, to perform maintenance or updates or other activities like that. So the idea is that it cannot be very rules based. And the key challenge then is to define what's abnormal in a deeper kind of way. And another challenge is that in our field, we kind of lack what in machine learning are called labeled data sets. So we see a lot of abnormal things in our client data, but there is no feedback loop as such, where like a malicious attack, that instance is very clearly identified. So such historical databases of malicious attacks don't really exist. And just to give you a contrasting example, if you are in credit card fraud detection, for example, there are a lot of databases, even within organization or just more widely available, that clearly identify that here's where an instance of fraud happened. And so you can train an algorithm to learn from those instances, right? So what were the signals last time a fraud occurred? And you can train your model that way. But in network security, we don't have a lot of these historical databases. So we have to primarily rely on what's called a machine learning approach called unsupervised learning. And here you're not necessarily trying to predict fraud versus no fraud label as such, but you're mostly trying to cluster the data in a way so that this data point that represents a malicious attack kind of stands apart from the cluster where everyone else is. Or you could try to represent your user behavior via network graphs, and then some user whose credentials might have been stolen, their daily activity graph is just going to look a little bit funny. So that's the type of approach, and this approach is fine. You can probably get to algorithms that are less wedded to the history, and therefore maybe they're a little bit quick on their feet. They adapt to like a new attack better. So there are some advantages as well, but it is challenging to test how well or not these unsupervised models perform. So you have to kind of play it by ear a little bit. And finally, one other challenge I'll mention is that a lot of data science is about converting things that are not numbers into numbers. So for example, you can give numerical representations to words or pictures. And this type of numerical representation, though, is a little bit harder to achieve in IT security. But this is a particularly interesting challenge. And at Adlumin, we focus a lot of our energy into such numerical representations.
Fascinating. And so, Jeet, when it comes to the cloud, how does that help in all of this?
The cloud is a huge help. Fact is that we couldn't do what we do here at Adlumin without the cloud. We process billions of data points a day, and we provide these security layers at a reasonable cost thanks to the power of cloud computing. We have built this serverless architecture that can scale up almost immediately with demand. And we have built these data lakes in the cloud that can store vast amounts of data. So a vast amount of storage and a tremendous amount of computing processing power are both very critical pillars. And so cloud computing, the cloud is really a huge enabler of what we're doing at Adlumin.
Sure, sure. So just transitioning here a little bit, because obviously working at Adlumin, a component of that is that it's a growing startup and a bit of a smaller team than if you were working, at a large corporation. And so something that at Hatchpad that we discuss frequently is just the change that happens when a developer works in the startup space versus working, at one of the more of a tech titan corporation sort of environment. And so from your perspective, what are a couple of traits that you would be looking for in a technologist that might be interested in transitioning into the startup environment?
I'm new to the world of startups, but something that I've already picked up and from my leadership and my colleagues here at Adlumin is that two key traits that are good to have. One is an adventurous spirit, and the other is an ability to improvise. So adventurous as in not afraid to take risks. And risk taking is almost like a precursor for a startup to even come into being. There is some entrepreneurial risk taking going on there. So that's kind of the spirit that you see that drives startup companies. And in my world, in data science, the way I kind of apply this is sometimes if there's a high hanging fruit out there, you just got to go for it. If it seems like you need to devote 100 hours of development time for this project, you just got to make that investment. But at the same time, you should also be ready to improvise. You're not always going to get expected results, or the model may not perform exactly as desired, or may not even have the same functionality that you started out designing. But work that you've already put in can almost always be salvaged. You can look for lessons learned and find utility in something in the investment that you've already made, and you got to realize that the model you have built or the work that you've put in is good for something, and improvisation is a pretty big component of figuring out how best to use the material that you have in hand to solve problems.
Interesting. And in that kind of environment, as you mentioned, a component of that is just not fearing failure, and it's having that kind of adventurous mentality. So how do you think that startups can sort of create a culture of mentorship, or a place where developers can kind of grow in that environment?
I think it has to start with leadership. So it has to start at the very top and then kind of be transmitted all the way down. And so everyone has to be told, I think, explicitly right from the beginning that we are not going to be afraid to take risks, and that we are going to have well-managed processes so that we are able to measure the risk that we are taking. And before getting into it, we should have a decent sense of what the fallout could be. And so put some thinking into how we can manage the fallout, or if things don't pan out, what's going to be plan B. But that idea that it's okay to take risks, it's okay to fail, has to be led. Like there has to be some leadership, investment, and conscious participation in this idea of spreading the doctrine of risk, if you will.
Great. Well, Jeet, thank you so much for just sharing your insights today and your perspective on what it means to work in the startup space, and in particular with the work that you're doing at Adlumin. Really appreciate your insight there.
Thanks, Lauren.